Persecution of Muslims in Myanmar. Human rights violations against Rohingya. Background. According to Amnesty International, the Rohingya Muslim people have continued to suffer from human rights violations under the Burmese junta since 1978, and many have fled to neighboring Bangladesh as a result. However, the reality is that the Rohingya people have been oppressed for many years prior to 1978, though perhaps not as significantly. They have lived in Myanmar for centuries, but tensions with Myanmar's Buddhist majority have caused discrimination and harassment. Cases of rape, torture, arbitrary detention, and violence against Rohingya are commonplace, with many incidents going unreported as enforcement officers turn a blind eye. These perpetrators are not solely confined to the local population, but also include the authorities and law enforcers themselves. Tensions increased in 2012, when 3 Rohingya Muslim men were convicted of raping a local Rakhine Buddhist woman, which led to the 2012 Rakhine state riots. There are currently over 1 million Rohingya people living in Myanmar. However, systemic oppression has led to an increase in migrations. In early 2015 alone, around 25,000 asylum seekers, consisting of Rohingyas and Bangladeshis, sailed out of the Rakhine state to seek refuge in neighboring countries. Aside from Bangladesh, majority of asylum seekers also set out to other Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand, but also to Malaysia and Indonesia, which are predominantly Muslim countries. Mass exoduses due to persecution and mass violence, such as the one in 2012, has happened before in 1978 and 1992, with many of the fleeing Rohingya people being marginalized and excluded in host states. They are often not recognized and not protected as refugees, and as a result, they live in extreme poverty, have to resort to illegal employment and are vulnerable to exploitation. Legal framework. The Rohingya people have been denied Burmese citizenship since the Burmese Nationality Law, 1982 Citizenship Act, was enacted. The government of Myanmar claims that the Rohingya are illegal immigrants who arrived during the British colonial era, and were originally Bengalis. The Rohingya that are allowed to stay in Myanmar are considered resident foreigners and not citizens. They are not allowed to travel without official permission and were previously required to sign a commitment not to have more than 2 children, though the law was not strictly enforced. Many Rohingya children cannot have their birth registered, thus rendering them stateless from the moment they are born. In 1995, the government of Myanmar responded to UNRWA's pressure by issuing basic identification cards, which does not mention the bearer's place of birth, to the Rohingya. Without proper identification and documents, the Rohingya people are officially stateless with no state protection and their movements are severely restricted. As a result, they are forced to live in squatter camps and slums. International conventions. Myanmar, otherwise known as Burma at the time, was one of the 48 countries that voted for the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Article 2 of the UDHR states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Also, Article 5 of the UDHR states that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. However, the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which aims to prevent torture and other acts of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, around the world, has not been signed nor ratified by Myanmar, as of 2016. In addition, Myanmar is also not a party to the Convention relating to the status of stateless persons, which aims to protect stateless individuals, or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICPR, that aims to ensure states respect individuals' civil and political rights, which includes but are not limited to, the right to life and freedom of religion. That being said, a number of international treaties have been ratified or acceded to by Myanmar, namely the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, UNCRC, on July 2, 1997 and July 15, 1991 respectively. There are slow but positive developments in recent years. For instance, Myanmar signed, but has not ratified, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICCR, which protects the right to education, the right to health, and the right to an adequate standard of living, on July 16, 2015. Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review, UPR, is a mechanism of the United Nations, UN, that reviews the human rights records of all UN member states. It is a unique process that is undertaken by the Human Rights Council, which allows each state to recognize key areas of human rights issue that has had progress in the country, and also to identify further steps and efforts that will be taken to meet their international obligations. As a member of the UN, Myanmar is obliged to be involved in the UPR process. On December 23, 2015, a report of the Working Group on the UPR on Myanmar looked at the current human rights situation in Myanmar and noted that the government of Myanmar has made positive advances in political, administrative, social and judicial reforms. Nonetheless, many states, such as Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, United Kingdom, expressed concern about, amongst other things, human rights violations against the Rohingya people, as there was still much more room for improvement in this area. For instance, Bahrain expressed concern about ethnic purification and discrimination against Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State. It was also noted in the report that the Ethnic Rights Protection Law of 2015 would broaden the rights of all ethnic minorities in Myanmar. However, the government of Myanmar reiterated their stance that there was no minority community in Myanmar under the name of Rohingya. Nonetheless, the aftermath of the 2012 Rakhine State violence led to the formation of a commission of inquiry, which recommended that a central committee be set up for the implementation of stability and development. Since then, the government has provided humanitarian access, such as food, water and education services, to displaced people around the Rakhine State. In addition, a project for citizenship verification was launched, which granted 900 displaced people citizenships. The report was concluded by various recommendations from member states, with many of the states suggesting that Myanmar ratify other main human rights treaties that it is not a party to and to further enhance their international obligations towards the Rohingya people. Human rights violations. Despite Myanmar's commitment to some international conventions, its domestic laws severely oppresses various minority groups, especially the Rohingya. The 1982 citizenship law represents systemic discrimination at a policy level by the government of Myanmar, which openly denies the Rohingya access to basic human rights such as access to education, employment, marriage, reproduction and freedom of movement. Rohingya people are also subjected to routine forced labor. Typically, a Rohingya man will have to give up one day a week to work on military or government projects, and one night for sentry duty. The Rohingya have also lost a lot of arable land, which has been confiscated by the military to give to Buddhist settlers from elsewhere in Myanmar. The movement of the Rohingya people are strictly limited to only a few surrounding areas, and even so, a travel pass is required. If they travel without permission or overstay the time allowed on their travel pass, they are open to being prosecuted and may even receive jail sentences. Also, they will be denied entry back into their village and be forced to live away from their family. Even during emergencies, they have to apply for a travel pass, which represent a serious violation to the right of freedom of movement. The quality of education and health care in the Rakhine State is undeveloped and inadequate, as compared to other parts of Myanmar. Despite this, the Rohingya severely lack basic access to these services, and in addition, international humanitarian agencies are not allowed to train Muslim health workers. As a result, the standard of health is severely lacking and the illiteracy rate amongst the Rohingyas is high, estimated at 80%. There are growing concerns that a genocide is occurring against the Rohingya in Myanmar. Research done by scholars in Yale Law School found empirical evidence that the Rohingya have historically suffered serious and persistent human rights abuses, and these actions have increased in frequency in recent years. Since 2012, living conditions and human rights abuses have worsened, with reports of beheadings, stabbings, killings, beatings, mass arrests and villages and neighborhoods being burned to the ground. However, there remains a lack of justice and accountability by the government of Myanmar, thus representing failure of state protection. As of 2005, the UNHCR had been assisting with the repatriation of Rohingya from Bangladesh, but allegations of human rights abuses in the refugee camps have threatened this effort. Despite earlier efforts by the UN, the vast majority of Rohingya refugees have remained in Bangladesh, unable to return because of the regime in Myanmar. Now they face problems in Bangladesh where they do not receive support from the government. Lack of support from the Bangladeshi government and also human rights abuses in Bangladeshi refugee camps have led many asylum seekers to risk their lives and to journey further south to other Southeast Asian countries. The mass exodus in 2015 has led to an international humanitarian crisis because of the deliberate refusal and alleged inability of host states in Southeast Asia to accommodate the vast number of asylum seekers. Most of them are also subjected to human trafficking by organized crime groups operating in Thailand and Malaysia. These traffickers take advantage of asylum seekers' desperation by exploiting them for money, with many of their victims being beaten, sold, or killed if they or their families do not comply with their demands. The 2015 Rohingya refugee crisis highlighted the flaws of the ASEAN community in responding to humanitarian crises, as the response from those countries were inadequate and delayed. Human rights violations against the Rohingya are not only confined to Myanmar and Bangladesh. The status of the Rohingya is unrecognized in most Southeast Asian countries. Although they do not receive the same persecution in countries such as Malaysia and Thailand, than in Myanmar, they are subjected to exclusions and poverty. There are roughly 111,000 refugees housed in 9 camps along the Thai-Myanmar border. There have been charges that groups of them have been shipped and towed out to open sea from Thailand, and left there. On February 2009, there was evidence of the Thai army towing a boatload of 190 Rohingya refugees out to sea. A group of refugees rescued by Indonesian authorities also in February 2009 told harrowing stories of being captured and beaten by the Thai military, and then abandoned at open sea. By the end of February, there were reports that a group of 5 boats were towed out to open sea, of which 4 boats sank in a storm, and 1 washed up on the shore. On February 12, 2009, Thailand's Prime Minister Abhisit Bachyajiva said there were some instances in which Rohingya people were pushed out to sea. There are attempts, I think, to let these people drift to other shores. When these practices do occur, it is done on the understanding that there is enough food and water supplied. It's not clear whose work it is, but if I have the evidence who exactly did this, I will bring them to account. October 2015, Al Jazeera's investigative unit has uncovered what amounts to strong evidence of a genocide coordinated by the Myanmar government against the Rohingya people. Based on many evidences, the investigation concluded that Myanmar government agents have been involved in triggering anti-Muslim riots. An official military document shows the use of several ways, including hate speech and hiring thugs to stir hatred. The investigation stressed that in the case of the Rohingya and Rakhine State, that could amount to the crime of genocide, several of the most powerful people in the country should reasonably be the subject of an international investigation into this situation of Rakhine State. Rohingya persecution and mass exodus of 2017. Violence broke out in northern Rakhine State on August 25, 2017, when militants attacked government forces. In response, security forces supported by Buddhist militia launched a clearance operation that has killed at least 1,000 people and forced more than 500,000 to flee their homes. The UN's top human rights official said on 11 September that the military's response was clearly disproportionate to insurgent attacks and warned that Myanmar's treatment of its Rohingya minority appears to be a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Refugees have spoken of massacres in villages, where they say soldiers raided and burned their homes. Satellite analysis by Human Rights Watch has shown evidence of fire damage in urban areas populated by Rohingyas, as well as in isolated villages. The UN estimated on 7 September that 1,000 had been killed. Bangladesh's foreign minister, Al Mahmood Ali, said unofficial sources put the death toll at about 3,000. More than 310,000 people had fled to Bangladesh by 11 September. Those who have made it to the border have walked for days, hiding in jungles and crossing mountains and rivers. Many are sick and some have bullet wounds. Aid agencies have warned of a growing humanitarian crisis in overstretched border camps, where water, food rations and medical supplies are running out of stock. Most refugees are now living in established camps, makeshift settlements or sheltering in host communities. Nearly 50,000 are in new spontaneous settlements that have sprung up along the border, where access to services is especially limited. There are also fears for Rohingya people trapped in conflict zones. On 4 September, the UN said its aid agencies had been blocked from supplying life-saving supplies such as food, water and medicine to thousands of civilians in northern Rakhine State. In November 2018, Foreign Secretary Min Thu explained that Myanmar is ready to take in 2,000 Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh camps over the coming month. International response. There is a lack of cooperation between Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia with regards to the Rohingya crisis. In May 2015, as many as 8,000 Rohingya boat people were believed to be stranded in rickety boats at sea, with little food and unsanitary conditions, and were left in limbo as countries refused the boats to dock. Critics have accused Southeast Asian governments of playing human ping-pong by refusing permission for these refugee boats to land and instead pushing them back out to sea in the direction of other countries. Though at various times in the past these countries of flight have been accepting of Rohingya refugees, most of them have not signed nor ratified the Convention relating to the status of refugees, 1951 Refugee Convention, and the Convention relating to the status of stateless persons. Thus the rights of the Rohingya people as refugee cannot be ensured. Human rights violations continue to occur in Malaysia and Thailand, with little to no protection from the governments. There are no effective mechanisms in these countries for the protection of Rohingya refugees. Instead, immigration crackdowns are common and Rohingya boat people are often deported out of these countries, falling victims to slavery instead. Because of the lack of proper documentation, many Rohingya people rely on smugglers and human traffickers to help them flee from persecution in Myanmar. There has been reports that authorities in Thailand and Malaysia have connections and ties with organized human trafficking groups, and as a result, majority of the Rohingya are sold in bonded labor and do not receive protection as refugees. In February 2009, many Rohingya refugees were helped by Chinese sailors in the Strait of Malacca, after 21 days at sea. However, this has not led to a consistent response from the Indonesian authorities, with many Rohingyas still not being accepted at the border. The governments of these countries, especially Malaysia and Indonesia, take an especially hardline approach on refugees arriving by boat, but a more lenient approach if they are registered through the UNHCR and arrive by appropriate means. It is estimated that Malaysia has currently up to 150,000 Rohingya people within its territory. Rashiduzzaman, professor of international relations at Dhaka University, said the reformist administration of Myanmar is said to be democratic. However, there were no signs that its strategy on the Rohingya would see an improvement soon. Indeed, even the opposition Democratic pioneer Aung San Suu Kyi, who had been kept under house arrest for nearly 15 of the 21 years from 1989 to 2010, is quiet on it. It implies the humanitarian crisis on the Rohingya issue that the world sees today may have no end in sight. In August 2016, former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan was invited to head a commission in addressing human rights violations in Rakhine. On February 3, 2017, the UN Human Rights Office alleged that the Myanmar military had long been engaged in a brutal rape and ethnic cleansing campaign against the country's Rohingya Muslims. On February 6, 2017, a U.S. State Department spokesperson stated that the U.S. was deeply troubled by the UN's allegations and urged the Myanmar government to take the findings seriously, but that they were also still studying how accurate the report was and would not come to any conclusion. On February 8, 2017, Pope Francis officially condemned the Myanmar government's treatment of Rohingya Muslims. The Kofi Annan Foundation also published the complete final report of the Advisory Commission on Rakhine State, which was accepted by the Myanmar government in August 2017. Citing 10% of the world's stateless people as having originated from Rakhine. Rohingya Muslims are a small/minority group of people in Myanmar, Burma. Rohingya Muslims have been exposed to methodical harassment and serious human right misuses by authorities for years. On August 25, 2017, the struggle had created an unparalleled humanitarian disaster with over 500,000 families in worried need of shelter, food, and water. This disaster caused more than 2,000 Rohingya Muslims to leave their houses and live in camps. These Rohingya Muslims have no freedom of movement, access to food, water, healthcare, and education. Meanwhile, there were Muslim women who were raped by the army and the common men, and then they were killed by them. Iran and Turkey are two Muslim countries which helped and aid the Rohingya Muslims who became homeless and landless by the people of Myanmar, Buddhist. The president of Iran is Hassan Rouhani and the Turkish president is Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Among all the other Muslim countries and communities, these two countries were more sensitive and sympathetic about the Rohingya Muslims. They both asked and spoke to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and asked them to find a solution and end the violence against the poor people, especially women and children. These two presidents are more worried about the life, healthcare, food, and mainly the water problem which Rohingya Muslims are facing. After the attack on Rohingya Muslims, which was done by the Myanmar army, they were supposed to leave their homes and villages and they had to go somewhere else, therefore they started moving to Bangladesh. During their move to Bangladesh, they had to cross the rivers with the small babies. When they were moving to Bangladesh, both of the countries Iran and Turkey, they had helped them with necessary things like food, water, and other things.